Centuries ago, a secret was buried deep beneath the Scottish Highlands. A secret the Templars took with them to the grave. But what if I told you? Their hidden crypt wasn't just a tomb, but a place of dark rituals, forbidden rules, and chilling mysteries that even today, no one dares to speak of. Tonight, we'll step inside the shadows of a centuries-old legend, uncover secrets hidden for generations, and reveal truths that were meant to stay buried forever. Are you ready to see what lurks in the darkness, beneath the Templars' hidden crypt? I had always been drawn to old places, the kind most people avoided. There was something about their silence, the way history seemed to press against the walls, whispering stories if you listened closely enough. So when I first heard rumors of a hidden Templar crypt somewhere deep in the Scottish Highlands, I didn't think twice. I had to see it for myself. The first time I heard about it, it came in the form of a dusty old letter tucked inside a book I bought from a second-hand shop in Edinburgh. The book was about medieval architecture, but between the pages, someone had scrawled a note. It said, simply, "Beneath the hills, the Templars keep their darkest secrets. Seek carefully. Speak to no one." I know how it sounds, mysterious, maybe even ridiculous, but something about those words lodged themselves in my mind. I couldn't stop thinking about them. I had spent years studying history, visiting castles, monasteries, even ancient burial grounds. I had seen plenty of old crypts, but this felt different. Dangerous. Personal. As though the letter was meant for me. I booked a flight to Scotland a few weeks later. I wanted to explore the Highlands, of course, but mostly, I wanted answers. There was something about the way the terrain was described. Rolling hills, hidden valleys, thick forests, that made me feel like the land itself was guarding a secret. When I arrived, the air hit me immediately. Cold, damp, with a faint scent of earth and pine. The locals I spoke to were friendly but reserved, polite but careful with their words. I tried asking about old Templar sites, crypts, or tunnels, and most would smile politely and shake their heads. One or two, however, gave me a different look. A warning. A hint that I shouldn't ask. But that only made me more determined. I rented a small cottage near the village closest to the hills described in the letter. It was old, with stone walls that creaked in the wind, a wood-burning fireplace, and narrow windows. Perfect for what I needed. Every night, I pored over maps, historical documents, anything I could find about the Templars' presence in Scotland. The more I read, the more I realized how little people actually knew. The Templars had vanished in the 14th century, officially dissolved, yet rumors persisted about secret sites they had built and left behind. The locals called one area the Shadow Hills. No one lived there, and even during the day, the woods seemed unervingly quiet. It was the kind of place where you could feel someone, or something, watching you. I knew immediately that if the crypt existed, this would be the area to start. I set out early the next morning, long before sunrise. The air was thick with mist, curling around the hills like smoke. My boots sank slightly into the soft earth with every step, and I had to push through low-hanging branches and thorny underbrush. The silence was almost unbearable, broken only by the occasional crow or the distant roar of a waterfall. Hours passed, and I found nothing but rocks, trees, and the occasional abandoned structure. Ruins that were probably hundreds of years old, but nothing that resembled a crypt. I began to doubt myself. Maybe the letter was a prank. Maybe the crypt didn't exist. Maybe I was chasing a ghost. And then I saw it. A large stone, almost entirely covered by moss and earth, half buried at the base of a small hill. At first, I thought it was just another rock, but as I brushed the moss aside, I noticed faint carvings on its surface. Symbols I recognized from my studies. The Templar cross, simple geometric patterns, almost ritualistic in appearance. My heart began to race. This was it. I was close. I spent the rest of the afternoon examining the hill, looking for any sign of an entrance. There were depressions in the ground, subtle lines that suggested something had been dug long ago, then sealed and forgotten. By the time the sun began to set, the mist thickened, and the shadows of the hills grew long and menacing. I knew I had only a few hours of daylight left to explore before I'd have to retreat. I returned to the cottage that night, but sleep didn't come easily. I lay in bed, listening to the wind whistle through the stone walls, imagining what lay beneath the hill. Old bones, relics, or something far darker, something the Templars had buried and never wanted anyone to find. The thought both terrified and thrilled me. I couldn't help thinking that this was bigger than anything I had ever chased in my life. I woke before dawn the next morning, filled with a mix of dread and excitement. I packed my bag carefully, a flashlight, rope, gloves, a notebook, and my camera. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. If what I suspected was true, the crypt was not a place for visitors, and I had no intention of asking for permission. When I reached the hill, the air was even colder than the day before. My breath came out in misty clouds, and every sound was amplified in the stillness. I knelt by the stone I had discovered, examining the carvings again. Something about them seemed almost alive, as though they were trying to communicate a warning I couldn't fully understand. Then I found it. A small crack at the base of the stone, barely visible under the moss. I pushed it gently, and to my surprise, the stone shifted slightly, revealing a narrow passage leading downward. My heart skipped a beat. This was it. The entrance to the Templar crypt. I hesitated for a moment. Every instinct told me to turn back, to leave the secrets buried where they belonged. But curiosity, that insatiable need to know, won. I tightened my gloves, grabbed my flashlight, and squeezed into the dark opening. The air was musty, damp, and heavy with the scent of earth and decay. Every sound of my movement echoed off unseen walls, making the passage feel far larger, and far more ancient, than it probably was. As I crawled deeper, I realized the tunnel opened into a small chamber. My flashlight illuminated rough stone walls, faint carvings, and the remnants of something that had been left untouched for centuries. There was a chill in the air, not just from the cold, but from something else, an almost palpable sense of presence, as if the crypt itself was aware I had entered. I couldn't explain it. Every historian I had ever studied had warned that curiosity can be dangerous. But nothing had prepared me for the feeling that I was trespassing in a place that had been deliberately hidden from the world. And yet, despite the fear, I felt alive in a way I had never felt before. Every step forward was a step closer to uncovering secrets long buried. Secrets that, if revealed, could change the way we understood the Templars forever. That night, I left the hill reluctantly, but I knew I would return. The crypt had called to me, and I could not ignore its call. I had no idea what awaited me inside, but one thing was certain. This was only the beginning. The dark rules of the Templars, whatever they were about to come to light, and I was about to see them with my own eyes. I couldn't stop thinking about the crypt that night. Sleep was a distant memory, replaced by visions of the dark passage, the ancient carvings, and the faint chill that seemed to seep into my bones even in my warm cottage. Every historian I had ever read spoke of the Templars as mysterious, secretive, and ruthless in their devotion to rules no one could fully understand. And now, for the first time, I was about to witness those secrets firsthand. The next morning, I returned to the hill with a sense of both anticipation and dread. The sky was overcast, thick clouds casting the highlands in a muted grey light. Mist clung to the hillsides, curling around tree trunks and stones, making the landscape feel otherworldly. I moved carefully, almost reverently, toward the moss-covered stone that marked the crypt's entrance. I knelt and examined the small crack again. It had widened slightly since yesterday, as if inviting me in. I shone my flashlight into the narrow opening. The beam caught something that made my stomach tighten, faint scratches on the stone walls, old markings, almost like someone had tried to leave a warning, or a message, centuries ago. I reached in and pushed the stone aside. The passage opened slightly, but just enough to squeeze through. The air inside was cold, damp, and heavy. I felt it press against me, almost tangible, as I lowered myself into the darkness. My flashlight beam cut through the black, revealing the rough-hewn walls of the tunnel. The scent of earth and decay was strong, but beneath it, there was something else, a faint metallic tang like iron or blood, though I couldn't be sure. I moved slowly, my hands brushing against the walls, feeling the carvings etched into the stone. Crosses, geometric shapes, and symbols I didn't recognize. Some seemed almost ritualistic, arranged in patterns that suggested intention, purpose. It was clear these were not just decorative. These were instructions, warnings, rules. The Templars' dark rules. The tunnel widened gradually, opening into a small chamber. My flashlight revealed a low stone ceiling, rough walls, and a floor covered with dust and debris. But it wasn't empty. In the center of the room lay a stone altar, simple yet imposing. It was worn smooth in places, as though hands had touched it countless times over centuries. Around it were scattered remnants, broken pottery, shards of metal, and small bones, brittle and yellowed with age. I stepped closer, careful not to disturb anything. My pulse was racing. The silence of the chamber was almost suffocating, broken only by the occasional drip of water from somewhere deeper in the crypt. I could feel the weight of history pressing down on me, as if the walls themselves remembered every secret, every ritual, every oath sworn here. I circled the altar, examining the carvings etched into its sides. They were subtle but deliberate, crosses entwined with circles, small lines that seemed almost like writing, though I couldn't decipher it. I took out my notebook and began sketching them, knowing that later I might spend hours trying to decode their meaning. Then I noticed a narrow passage leading away from the chamber. It was partially hidden behind a loose stone, almost as if it had been deliberately concealed. My heart skipped a beat. The crypt was larger than I had imagined. Someone had gone to great lengths to keep parts of it hidden. And now, I was about to discover them. I moved toward the passage, my flashlight cutting a thin beam through the darkness. The air grew colder, denser. My breath came in shallow bursts, fogging in front of me. Every sound echoed in the tunnel, making the space feel alive. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Not by a person, but by something else, by centuries of secrecy that had been waiting for someone like me. The passage opened into another chamber, larger than the first. This one had a higher ceiling, supported by rough stone columns. Shadows danced across the walls as my flashlight moved, revealing carvings and inscriptions that covered nearly every surface. Some were clearly Templar symbols, others more abstract, mysterious. And then I saw it, a faint red stain on the floor. Not fresh, obviously, but old, crusted, and darkened with age. I swallowed hard. Something had happened here, something violent, long ago. I traced the walls with my fingers, following the carvings. Some depicted scenes I couldn't fully understand. Figures kneeling before altars, objects being placed carefully, others raising their hands in gestures I didn't recognize. The further I went, the more I realized this crypt wasn't just a burial site. It was a place of ritual, of rules, of secrecy that had been meticulously preserved. Then I noticed a small recess in the wall, barely large enough to fit my hand. Inside was a metal box, rusted but intact. I hesitated, knowing that opening it could change everything. But curiosity overcame caution. I pried it open. Inside were fragments of parchment, brittle and yellowed, covered in a language I didn't immediately recognize. Some symbols were familiar, Templar crosses, geometric patterns, but others were entirely foreign. I carefully removed one piece, unfolding it as best I could. The writing was precise, almost surgical, detailing rules and rituals. I couldn't read all of it, but certain phrases stood out: forbidden to outsiders, rule of silence, oath of blood. My pulse quickened. These were the dark rules I had read about in legend. And now, I was holding them in my hands. I spent hours in that chamber, moving slowly from one carving to the next, sketching, photographing, taking notes. Every detail mattered. Every symbol, every fragment could reveal a piece of the Templars' secret world. The air grew colder still, and the deeper I went, the more I felt the presence of the past pressing down on me. It wasn't just history. It was alive, in a way that was almost tangible. As I explored, I noticed something else. Subtle signs that someone had been here long after the Templars. Footprints in the dust, marks on the walls, a faint impression of modern shoe soles. Whoever it was, they hadn't disturbed the crypt much. But the thought unsettled me. I was not the first intruder, and I might not be the last. By the time I finally decided to leave, the sun had dipped below the horizon. The mist had thickened outside, swallowing the hills. I crawled back through the narrow passage, carefully replacing the stone that concealed the entrance. My hands were cold, my body exhausted, but my mind was racing. I had seen only a fraction of the crypt, and already the dark rules of the Templars were beginning to make themselves known. Back at the cottage, I sat by the fire, reviewing my notes and sketches. The more I looked at them, the more I realized how dangerous this knowledge could be. Secrets that had been protected for centuries were now in my hands. And with that knowledge came responsibility and fear. The Templars had not vanished without reason. They had left rules, protections, warnings. I had to respect them, or I could pay a price. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking of the metal box, the parchments, the red stain on the floor. Something about it felt unfinished, like the crypt had more to reveal. And I knew it did. The Templars' dark rules weren't meant for casual discovery. They were meant to test the curiosity and courage of those who dared enter. I didn't know it yet, but what I had found that day was only the beginning. The crypt held more than carvings and parchments. It held a history that was carefully hidden, a story that had been buried by blood, fear, and secrecy. And I was about to uncover it all. The morning after my first full exploration of the crypt, I couldn't get the images out of my head. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the narrow passageways, the rough stone walls, the altar, and the parchments I had carefully studied. Even more, I couldn't shake the sense that the crypt was aware of me, that it had judged me and allowed me to uncover a fraction of its secrets. I returned to the cottage, exhausted but restless. I spent the day analyzing the sketches I had made, cross-referencing them with historical texts I had brought along. The symbols were unmistakably Templar, yet many seemed unfamiliar, almost otherworldly. I realized I was looking at a level of secrecy that went beyond ordinary historical practice. These weren't just ceremonial carvings, they were a guide, instructions left for someone, perhaps only someone brave or foolish enough to follow them. By evening, I decided I couldn't wait any longer. The crypt called me back. The sun was dipping behind the hills, and the mist began to settle in the valleys, turning the landscape into a ghostly tableau. I made my way back to the moss-covered stone entrance, flashlight and notebook in hand. This time, I felt a strange mix of anticipation and dread, as though the crypt itself was testing me. Once inside, the familiar chill greeted me like an old companion. I moved quickly to the central chamber, careful not to disturb the dust. Everything was as I had left it. The altar, the scattered bones, the metal box. I paused at the altar this time, tracing my fingers along the carvings again. There was a rhythm to the symbols, a pattern I hadn't noticed before. Almost like a sequence, instructions encoded in stone. I followed the side passage that led to the larger chamber, and that's when I noticed something new. On the floor, faint scratches caught the beam of my flashlight. At first, I thought it was an animal, rats, maybe, but the marks were deliberate. A series of lines and dots forming a sequence, leading toward the far wall. My heart pounded. This was a message. But from whom? Or from when? I traced the markings to a small, hidden recess I hadn't noticed before. It was narrower than my body, forcing me to squeeze sideways to peer inside. Inside lay a small chest, roughly carved from wood and reinforced with iron bands. Unlike the metal box from the first chamber, this one had clearly been moved recently. The dust was disturbed, and faint fingerprints marred the surface. I hesitated. Someone, or something, had been here. Perhaps not recently, but the signs were unmistakable. And yet, curiosity overpowered fear. I opened the chest slowly. Inside were several objects, a rusted dagger, an old key, and a bundle of parchment tied with a faded leather strap. The dagger was small, ceremonial, the metal etched with symbols similar to the ones on the walls. The key looked ordinary, but its weight was heavy, and the craftsmanship was delicate, precise. I picked up the bundle of parchment. Each sheet was fragile, yellowed, and curling at the edges. I carefully unrolled one and began to read. The writing was in an archaic script, but certain phrases were clear. Only the worthy may enter, oath of silence and obedience, forbidden to reveal the sacred path. My pulse quickened. These weren't just rules, they were instructions. The Templars had left behind not only warnings but a map of secrets, a guide through their hidden world. I studied the dagger. There was an inscription along the blade's spine, worn with age. I could barely make out the words. Guardian of the secret. It was almost too deliberate to be coincidence. This wasn't just an artifact. It was a symbol, a key to understanding the crypt itself. I realized the Templars had constructed a hierarchy of rules, each object a test of trust and understanding. As I pondered the significance, a cold draft swept through the chamber. The air seemed to press in on me, carrying with it a faint whisper, so faint I thought I imagined it at first. But then I heard it again, more distinct this time, almost like a voice carried from the walls themselves. Do not disturb what should remain hidden. I froze. My flashlight trembled in my hand. The room felt alive, watching me, measuring me. I knew in that moment that I was not simply discovering history. I was stepping into a world that had been deliberately shielded, a world where curiosity could have consequences far beyond my understanding. Shaking, I turned my attention back to the parchment. I realized that the symbols, the dagger, and the key were connected. The parchments referenced hidden chambers within the crypt, spaces deliberately concealed to guard the most sacred secrets. Some of the instructions were cryptic. Follow the path of light, trust only what is engraved, step where shadows linger. It was clear that these rules were not meant for casual exploration. They were a test, and I was only beginning. I moved deeper into the chamber, following the patterns etched into the floor and walls. The air grew colder with each step. My flashlight caught the glint of something embedded in the far wall, a small stone panel, barely distinguishable from the surrounding rock. The carvings on it matched a sequence I had seen in the earlier parchment. My hands shook as I pressed gently against it. The panel shifted slightly. A section of the wall moved inward, revealing a narrow corridor beyond. The smell of damp earth was stronger here, almost overpowering. I took a deep breath and stepped inside. The passage was tight, forcing me to move slowly, flashlight sweeping every inch. Shadows danced across the walls, and for a moment, I imagined shapes moving just beyond the light. My mind screamed at me to turn back, but I pressed forward. After several minutes, the corridor opened into a small alcove. In the center was a pedestal, and atop it rested a single object wrapped in dark cloth. I approached cautiously. The air was thick, almost suffocating, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. Slowly, I lifted the cloth. Beneath it lay a small, intricately carved box. Unlike anything I had seen so far, it was covered with symbols I could not recognize, though their design matched patterns throughout the crypt. I realized with a jolt that this box was likely the most important artifact here, a key to secrets that had been deliberately hidden for centuries. As I examined the box, I noticed a series of small indentations along its edges. They looked like they were meant to hold something. My mind raced back to the dagger and the key. Could they fit? I hesitated, aware that touching the wrong object in the wrong way could trigger consequences I couldn't predict. But the sense of purpose, the feeling that this moment had been waiting for me for centuries, overrode my fear. I carefully placed the dagger and key in the indentations. The box shuddered slightly beneath my hands, as though alive. A faint click echoed through the chamber, and the lid creaked open. Inside, I found a collection of scrolls and objects unlike anything I had imagined. Maps of tunnels, instructions in code, and small ceremonial tools. These were the Templars' most guarded secrets. For the first time, I understood the true scale of what I had uncovered. This crypt was not merely a burial site. It was a repository of knowledge, a place where the Templars' rules, rituals, and perhaps even forbidden practices had been preserved. I realized the significance of what I held. If interpreted correctly, these scrolls could reveal centuries of hidden history. But the sense of foreboding remained. The crypt was alive with its secrets, and I had crossed a threshold. I felt the weight of responsibility pressing on me. One wrong step, one careless action, and I could disturb forces or truths the Templars had intentionally concealed. And yet, despite the fear, I couldn't stop. I had come too far to turn back. As I carefully packed the scrolls and replaced the objects, I made a silent promise. I would uncover these secrets, but I would do so with respect. The Templars had left rules for a reason, and I would need every ounce of patience and courage to navigate them. That night, as I crawled back through the narrow passage to the surface, I knew that the crypt had only begun to reveal its story. The dark rules of the Templars were coming to light, and I was walking a path that few had dared to tread. The next morning, I woke with a mixture of excitement and unease. My sleep had been fitful, haunted by fragments of the crypt, the altar, and the artifacts I had uncovered. I could still feel the cold draft, the whispering air, as though the crypt itself were alive and aware of my presence. I had spent hours the previous night reviewing the scrolls and carvings, but I knew that I had only scratched the surface. There was more to discover, and the crypt seemed determined to show me. I returned to the hill as the mist hung low over the highlands. The air was damp and sharp, carrying with it the scent of earth and moss. The stone marking the crypt's entrance loomed ahead, covered in thick moss and the shadows of the early morning. I knelt and examined the crack I had first discovered. It seemed smaller now, almost as if the hill itself had shifted to protect its secrets. Crawling through the narrow opening, I descended into the familiar passage. The walls felt colder this morning, and the air seemed heavier, almost oppressive. I paused at the central chamber, noting the altar and the scattered debris. Everything was exactly as I had left it, except for a subtle change in the carvings. Small scratches along the edges of some symbols, almost imperceptible, that suggested movement or interference since my last visit. I moved toward the larger chamber where I had discovered the hidden chest. The chest and its contents were still there, untouched. I carefully replaced the artifacts in my backpack, making sure nothing was disturbed. But my attention was drawn to a small, previously unnoticed tunnel branching off from the far side of the room. It was narrower than the main passage, barely wide enough to squeeze through, and partially concealed by rubble and fallen stones. I hesitated. The crypt seemed to demand caution, yet at the same time, it pulled me forward. Curiosity had been my guide so far, and it would guide me now. I tightened my gloves, adjusted my flashlight, and crawled into the narrow passage. The air was colder here, damp and musty, pressing against my lungs with every breath. The walls were rough, jagged and uneven, forcing me to move slowly and deliberately. As I progressed, I noticed faint inscriptions etched into the stone. Unlike the symbols I had seen before, these were more complex, almost like a code. Circles, triangles, and lines intersected in ways I didn't recognize. I traced them with my fingers, feeling a strange energy, a rhythm in the carvings that seemed deliberate and purposeful. The crypt was communicating, guiding me, testing me. The passage widened slightly into a chamber I hadn't discovered before. Its ceiling was low, supported by crude stone pillars, and the walls were covered in carvings that were both intricate and disturbing. Scenes depicted figures kneeling, performing rituals, raising hands in gestures I didn't understand. Some carvings suggested sacrifices, not in the exaggerated sense, but symbolic acts tied to obedience and loyalty. The Templars' dark rules were being made tangible here. At the far end of the chamber, I noticed a stone door, partially hidden in the shadows. Its surface was smooth, unlike the rough walls around it, and small symbols lined its edges. They matched the coded patterns I had seen along the passage, suggesting that this door was the key to another, more sacred section of the crypt. My pulse quickened. I knew that behind it lay secrets the Templars had guarded above all else. I examined the door closely. There was no visible handle, but faint indentations along the stone suggested it required pressure in a specific pattern to open. I studied the carvings on the walls, tracing lines and circles, and realized the sequence matched part of the coded inscriptions I had seen along the tunnel. Carefully, I pressed the stones in order. The door shuddered slightly, then moved inward with a grinding sound. Beyond the door lay a narrow, descending staircase. The stone steps were worn smooth, evidence of centuries of use. I shone my flashlight downward. The air grew colder, almost unbearably so, and I felt a faint, almost imperceptible vibration beneath my feet, as if the crypt itself were alive and aware of my intrusion. I descended slowly, counting each step, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. At the base of the staircase, I entered a chamber that took my breath away. The walls were lined with alcoves, each holding objects preserved through centuries. Ceremonial daggers, small chests, scrolls, and fragments of manuscripts. Some were clearly Templar in origin, others unidentifiable. In the center of the room stood a larger altar, more elaborate than the one above, carved with symbols that glowed faintly in the beam of my flashlight. I approached the central altar. On it lay a collection of objects unlike anything I had seen. An iron chalice etched with Templar symbols, a small obsidian box, and what appeared to be a ceremonial mask. I felt a shiver run down my spine. These were not just artifacts. They were instruments of ritual, tools used in the observance of the Templars' rules, preserved with an almost obsessive care. As I studied the items, I noticed faint markings along the floor, a pattern leading from the altar to a small recess in the far wall. Curiosity propelled me forward. Inside the recess was another set of scrolls, carefully tied with a leather strap. The parchment was fragile, but the writing was surprisingly legible. I unrolled one and began to read, my flashlight trembling in my hand. The scroll detailed the Templars' secret code of conduct, their hierarchy, and rituals. It spoke of oaths of silence, loyalty, and obedience, emphasizing that certain knowledge was forbidden to outsiders. Some passages hinted at ceremonies performed in absolute secrecy, perhaps explaining the carvings and artifacts I had seen. There were references to tunnels, hidden chambers, and protective measures, suggesting that the crypt was only a part of a much larger network of secret locations. I spent hours documenting every detail, sketching symbols, photographing artifacts, and taking notes. The deeper I went, the more I realized the crypt was not merely a tomb or ritual site. It was a repository of knowledge, a controlled space where the Templars had recorded and preserved their most guarded secrets. Every object, every carving, every scroll was part of a system, meticulously designed to protect the rules they lived by. Yet, despite the intellectual fascination, a subtle unease lingered. There were moments when shadows seemed to shift just beyond the edge of my flashlight, when faint whispers echoed through the chamber. I told myself it was my imagination, a trick of the mind in the darkness. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that the crypt was aware of me, that it had a presence far older and more deliberate than any mortal. Before leaving, I carefully replaced all objects and resealed the hidden doors and panels. I ascended the staircase, retraced my steps through the tunnels, and emerged into the open air. The mist hung thick over the hills, curling around the trees and stones as if to conceal the crypt once more. I stood for a moment, breathing in the cold highland air, my mind racing. I knew then that I had only just begun to uncover the Templars' secrets. The crypt held more than carvings and scrolls. It held the history, the rules, and perhaps the very essence of a world deliberately hidden from time. I realized that my journey would not be easy. Every step deeper into the crypt's mysteries carried risk, and yet, I couldn't turn back. As I walked back to the cottage, the weight of responsibility pressed on me. The Templars' secrets were no longer buried, they were in my hands. And I knew that the deeper I went, the closer I came to truths that had been deliberately kept hidden for centuries. I returned to the crypt the following morning, my mind still racing from the discoveries in the hidden tunnels. The mist hung low over the hills, and the air was damp and cold, as if the highlands themselves were conspiring to keep the Templars' secrets safe. I approached the moss-covered stone entrance, my flashlight and notebook ready, and crawled once more into the familiar passage. The tunnels seemed different this time. The shadows were deeper, more pronounced, and every sound echoed with a sharp clarity that made me tense. Even the faint dripping of water seemed amplified, as though the crypt itself were alert to my presence. I paused in the central chamber, examining the altar and the carvings again. The air was heavy with anticipation, almost as if the crypt knew I was about to uncover something dangerous. I moved to the larger chamber, where the chest and scrolls had been my focus in the previous visit. I carefully removed the items I had documented before, examining them for anything I might have missed. The coded carvings on the walls, the symbols etched into the artifacts, and the parchment with the Templars' rules all seemed to pulse with meaning. But it wasn't until I traced a new pattern along the floor that I realized the full extent of the crypt's design. The pattern led to a section of the wall I had never explored, concealed by loose stones and shadows. It was narrow, forcing me to squeeze sideways, my flashlight illuminating carvings that I had overlooked before. They were darker in tone than the previous symbols, depicting scenes of punishment, secrecy, and obedience. I could almost feel the weight of the Templars' rules pressing down on me. Every line, every shape, seemed deliberate, like a warning encoded in stone. At the far end of the passage, I discovered a hidden door, smaller than the one leading to the descending staircase. Its surface was worn and uneven, and faint scratches suggested it had been opened before, though long ago. I pressed gently on the stone, testing for mechanisms or hidden triggers. My fingers traced the symbols along its edges, and I realized that these carvings were part of a sequence, a code that had to be solved to gain access. I took a deep breath and began the sequence, pressing the stones in order as indicated by the carvings. The door shifted slightly, and I squeezed through into a small, dimly lit chamber. The air was colder here, carrying a faint metallic scent. My flashlight illuminated a low stone altar in the center, surrounded by a series of alcoves that held objects both fascinating and unsettling. In one alcove, I saw a ceremonial dagger, smaller and sharper than the previous one I had found. Its blade was etched with symbols that I couldn't decipher, but the craftsmanship was meticulous. Next to it lay an iron-bound chest, its surface covered in scratches and marks, as though it had been handled carefully but repeatedly over centuries. The floor around the altar was covered in dust, but I noticed faint footprints that suggested someone, or something, had been here in the past. I approached the chest carefully and lifted the lid. Inside were more scrolls, bundles of parchment tied with leather, and several small objects I didn't recognize. One of them was a small vial containing a dark, thick substance that seemed almost alive, suspended in the glass. I shivered. The Templars had not merely preserved history, they had preserved something dangerous, something meant to remain hidden. As I examined the scrolls, I realized they contained instructions that went beyond rituals or rules. They described protective measures, warnings, and consequences for disobedience. Some passages mentioned punishments so severe that I could barely comprehend them. Exile, secrecy enforced through fear, even symbolic sacrifices. The Templars had been ruthless in maintaining their order, and the crypt itself was a testament to their discipline and vigilance. I was about to put the scrolls back when I noticed a faint vibration beneath my feet. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but the vibration grew stronger, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. The air felt heavier, and I realized that the crypt was reacting to my presence. It was as though it had been waiting for someone worthy, or foolish, enough to disturb its secrets. I glanced at the objects around me, and my eyes fell on the ceremonial dagger. Something compelled me to pick it up. The metal was cold, almost unnaturally so, and the symbols along the blade seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. I couldn't explain why, but I felt a surge of energy, a sense that the dagger was more than a tool. It was a key, a protector, or perhaps a test. As I held the dagger, I heard it, a faint whisper, so soft I thought I imagined it at first. Then it grew clearer, a voice that seemed to echo from the walls themselves. Only the worthy may proceed. Only those who obey the rules may survive. My pulse quickened. I knew then that the Templars' warnings were real. This crypt was not just a repository of artifacts. It was a living system of protection, designed to challenge anyone who dared enter. The scrolls mentioned a final chamber, a place where the most sacred secrets were kept, guarded by mechanisms and knowledge encoded throughout the crypt. The instructions were cryptic but clear. Only by following the path exactly, by interpreting the symbols and sequences correctly, could one reach it. Any mistake could trigger consequences. Mechanical, symbolic, or otherwise. The Templars had not left this to chance. They had ensured that only the truly worthy could proceed. I felt a chill run down my spine. The crypt was testing me. Every step I had taken, every symbol I had deciphered, was part of a sequence that could either grant access to unimaginable knowledge or trap me in the shadows forever. The sense of danger was palpable, and yet, I couldn't stop. I had come too far, and the thrill of discovery pushed me forward despite the fear gnawing at the edges of my mind. I traced the sequence on the walls and floor carefully, my hands steady despite the tension. The vibrations beneath me seemed to respond to my movements, growing in intensity with each correct step. Shadows danced across the chamber, and for a moment, I imagined figures moving just beyond the edge of the flashlight's beam. I told myself it was my imagination, but the sense of being watched was undeniable. Finally, I reached a small stone door at the far end of the chamber. Its surface was covered in intricate carvings, symbols that I recognized from the scrolls. I pressed the final sequence, and the door creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into complete darkness. The air was colder still, and the metallic scent stronger, almost suffocating. I realized that what awaited me below was far more dangerous than anything I had encountered so far. I paused at the top of the staircase, flashlight in hand, dagger at my side, and took a deep breath. The Templars' dark rules were not just guidelines, they were warnings. And I was about to discover the first consequence of disturbing their secrets. The crypt had tested my curiosity, my courage, and my understanding, and now it was time to reveal the danger that had been waiting for centuries. Stepping carefully down the worn stone steps, I felt the air grow heavier with each movement. The darkness seemed almost alive, pressing against me, and the whispers of the past grew louder, more insistent. I realized that the final chamber was not merely a room, it was a threshold, a point of no return. The secrets contained within were powerful, perhaps too powerful for the unprepared. As I descended, I knew one thing with certainty. The Templars had hidden something here for a reason, and I was about to confront the first dangerous secret that had claimed the curiosity, and perhaps even the lives, of those who came before me. The air grew colder as I descended the narrow staircase, each step echoing through the darkness. The vibrations beneath my feet, subtle at first, now pulsed like a heartbeat, synchronized with my own nervous pulse. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, but curiosity, that relentless force, drove me onward. I had followed the Templars' rules, decoded their sequences, and now I was standing at the threshold of the final chamber, the heart of their hidden world. At the bottom, the staircase opened into a vast cavern, far larger than any chamber I had encountered before. The walls were carved with intricate patterns, symbols interwoven in complex arrangements that glowed faintly under my flashlight's beam. It wasn't illumination in the traditional sense. The stone itself seemed to emit a faint phosphorescence, casting eerie shadows that danced like spirits along the walls. I stepped inside cautiously. The floor was smooth, worn by centuries of ritual passage. In the center of the chamber stood a massive stone altar, larger and more elaborate than any I had seen in the crypt above. It was carved with geometric patterns and Templar crosses, their edges sharp and precise. The altar seemed almost alive under the beam of my light, radiating a presence I could not fully comprehend. Around the altar were objects that sent a shiver down my spine. Ceremonial daggers, obsidian boxes, small metal instruments I didn't recognize, and scrolls bound in delicate leather. Each item seemed deliberately placed, as though telling a story, leaving a message for anyone brave enough, or foolish enough, to reach this chamber. The crypt had not simply preserved history. It had orchestrated a narrative, and I was now a part of it. I approached the altar slowly, tracing my fingers along the carvings. The symbols were complex, some familiar from my previous explorations, others entirely new. One particular pattern drew my attention. a series of interlocking circles and triangles etched into the stone, connected by lines that led to small depressions in the altar. I realized immediately that this was a puzzle, a mechanism designed to protect the Templars' most guarded secret. I retrieved the dagger and the small key I had found earlier. They fit perfectly into the depressions, as if designed to be used together. The moment I pressed them in place, a low rumble echoed through the chamber, and a hidden compartment in the altar slid open. Inside was a small, intricately carved box, far older than anything else I had found in the crypt. Its surface was etched with symbols that seemed almost alive, shifting subtly in the dim light. I lifted the box carefully. The weight was surprising, heavier than it looked, and the air around it felt charged, almost electric. I opened it slowly, and inside lay a collection of scrolls, manuscripts, and a small vial containing a dark liquid that shimmered faintly, as if suspended in time. I realized immediately that this was the Templars' most sacred collection, preserved for centuries behind layers of puzzles and protective measures. I began to examine the scrolls. The text was written in an archaic script, some passages in Latin, others in a cipher I had yet to decode. Certain phrases stood out. Only those who follow the path may wield knowledge. Secrets are power, misuse them, and the shadows will claim the unworthy. My pulse quickened. The crypt was warning me. It was not just a repository of history, it was a test. As I read, I realized that the scrolls contained instructions for rituals, protective measures, and encoded knowledge the Templars had safeguarded. There were references to alliances, betrayals, and oaths taken in secret. Some passages hinted at forbidden practices, acts so secretive they had been deliberately obscured from history. The deeper I read, the more I understood. The Templars had not vanished, they had hidden, preserved, and protected their most sacred knowledge for centuries. A chill ran down my spine. The crypt was alive with its secrets, and I could feel a presence, not hostile, but aware of my intrusion. Shadows seemed to shift along the walls, faint whispers brushing the edge of my hearing. I told myself it was imagination, the effect of isolation and the oppressive silence. But even as I rationalized it, I couldn't shake the sense that I was being tested, evaluated by forces older than myself. I examined the small vial. The dark liquid inside shimmered with an almost unnatural quality, and a faint scent, metallic and sweet, emanated from it. I realized this was not merely symbolic. It was likely part of a ritual, a preserved substance used in ceremonies that had been deliberately hidden. Handling it felt dangerous, and yet I couldn't resist studying it. Every detail mattered, every artifact, every symbol was a key to understanding the Templars' world. Hours passed as I documented every object, sketched the carvings, photographed the artifacts, and transcribed the scrolls as best I could. The chamber seemed to respond to my presence. The air thickened, the shadows deepened, and the subtle vibrations beneath my feet grew stronger. I realized then that the crypt was not merely a passive repository. It was a living entity, a protective system designed to challenge, test, and preserve. By late afternoon, I paused to catch my breath. The weight of what I had discovered pressed on me. The Templars' dark rules were not mere superstition, they were deliberate, structured, and terrifyingly effective. This chamber represented the pinnacle of their secrecy, and I was only beginning to understand the magnitude of what they had hidden. The knowledge preserved here could reshape historical understanding, but it came with a profound sense of danger. As I studied the altar one last time before leaving, I noticed a subtle movement in the shadows. It was brief, almost imperceptible, but enough to make my pulse race. I told myself it was a trick of the light, a reflection from the glowing carvings. Yet deep down, I knew it wasn't. The crypt had secrets that extended beyond the physical artifacts. There was a presence, a consciousness, tied to the Templars' rituals and rules, and it had been aware of me from the moment I entered. I carefully replaced the box, the vial, and the scrolls. Every object was returned to its exact position, every sequence in the altar mechanism reversed. I didn't want to provoke the crypt, and I realized the Templars had designed these layers of protection for a reason. Knowledge was power, but misuse could be catastrophic. I had glimpsed only the surface, and yet the weight of responsibility was overwhelming. Ascending the staircase, I felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. The upper chambers were familiar now, but the crypt's true heart, the final chamber, had left an indelible impression. I knew I could not fully comprehend it yet. The Templars had hidden something monumental, a secret preserved with precision, cunning, and perhaps fear. And now, I held the first understanding of that secret. Outside, the mist swirled around the hills, concealing the crypt as if it had never existed. I took a deep breath, the cold air stinging my lungs, and realized that my journey had only just begun. The final chamber had revealed the first dangerous secret of the Templars, but there were deeper layers, puzzles, and mysteries that awaited exploration. The crypt had tested me, shown me a glimpse of its power, and I knew it would demand more of me in the days to come. That night, as I sat by the fireplace in the cottage, the images of the final chamber played over and over in my mind. I could still feel the vibrations, hear the whispers, and sense the presence that had observed me. The Templars' dark rules were coming to light, piece by piece, and I understood that my curiosity had placed me on a path from which there was no turning back. The following morning, I returned to the crypt, my mind still consumed by the discoveries in the final chamber. The staircase seemed longer this time, the shadows deeper, as if the crypt itself was aware of my purpose and preparing to test me further. The mist hung low over the hills outside, thick and almost tangible, making the entrance seem otherworldly. I knelt and cleared the moss from the crack, entering the narrow passage with my flashlight and notebook in hand. The descent into the central chamber was familiar now, yet it carried a new tension. Every sound, every echo, seemed amplified. My footsteps on the stone floor reverberated through the tunnels like a heartbeat. The air smelled of damp earth and something metallic, a faint reminder of the vial I had glimpsed in the final chamber. The crypt felt alive, aware of me, measuring my intentions with every step. I moved quickly to the final chamber, eager to continue where I had left off. The massive stone altar loomed before me, surrounded by the artifacts and scrolls I had carefully documented. The glowing symbols on the walls seemed to respond to my presence, flickering slightly as if acknowledging my return. I set my backpack down and began to review the scrolls, hoping to decipher more of the Templars' secret knowledge. As I examined the manuscripts, I realized that their code was more complex than I had imagined. Symbols interwove with text, forming patterns that were both linguistic and geometric. Some passages were written in Latin, others in ciphers that combined numbers, symbols, and lines that mirrored the carvings on the walls. It was a language designed to be impossible for outsiders to understand. The Templars had created a system to protect knowledge that was meant to be preserved, not shared. I focused on one particular scroll that seemed to serve as a key. Its edges were frayed, and the writing was dense, yet the symbols appeared familiar. They matched sequences I had seen in the carvings along the passage leading to the final chamber. I traced the lines with my fingers, following the patterns slowly, carefully, as if the parchment itself were guiding me. A shiver ran down my spine. The Templars had designed this deliberately. It was a test. Hours passed as I worked to decode the scroll. Every symbol mattered, every intersection of lines carried significance. Slowly, a pattern emerged. It was a map, a guide to hidden chambers within the crypt, locations that had remained undiscovered for centuries. The map was layered with warnings, instructions, and symbols that indicated traps, protective measures, and rituals required to access these chambers safely. I realized that the crypt was far more extensive than I had imagined. One of the sequences on the map drew my attention. A series of symbols leading to a chamber marked with the Templar cross encircled by geometric patterns. The text beside it read, "The Chamber of Eternal Vigilance. Only those who obey the rules may proceed." My pulse quickened. This was clearly a section of the crypt that contained knowledge so secret it had been intentionally hidden from all but the most trusted Templars. And now, it was calling to me. I followed the map, retracing my steps through the tunnels, matching symbols on the walls to the sequences in the scroll. The air grew colder with each step, carrying the faint metallic scent of the vial I had seen earlier. Shadows seemed to shift around me, as if the crypt were alive and aware of my movements. I told myself it was imagination, yet the sense of being observed persisted, gnawing at the edges of my focus. Finally, I reached a section of the crypt I had never explored before. The passage was narrow and descending, forcing me to crouch. The walls were covered with symbols that pulsed faintly in response to my flashlight, almost as if acknowledging my presence. At the far end, a stone door stood partially concealed by rubble and darkness. Its surface was covered in intricate carvings, each line and curve corresponding to a symbol I had decoded from the scroll. I pressed the sequences carefully, following the instructions I had painstakingly deciphered. The door shuddered slightly, and with a low grinding sound, it shifted inward, revealing a narrow staircase. The steps descended into complete darkness, and the air grew heavier, pressing against me as if warning me to turn back. I took a deep breath and stepped forward, feeling the weight of centuries pressing down on me. At the bottom, the staircase opened into a chamber unlike any I had seen before. The walls were lined with alcoves containing scrolls, small chests, and artifacts, each carefully preserved. The floor was smooth, and in the center stood a stone pedestal with a single scroll resting upon it. This was the heart of the chamber, the culmination of the sequences I had decoded. I approached cautiously, aware that the Templars had designed every detail to test, protect, and preserve their most forbidden knowledge. I lifted the scroll and unrolled it carefully. The text was written in a mixture of Latin and coded symbols, but certain passages were clear. Knowledge is power. Misuse it, and the unworthy shall be claimed by shadows. Obey, understand, and proceed. My pulse raced. I realized this was the first truly forbidden knowledge the Templars had preserved, a set of instructions and insights they had deemed too dangerous to share with anyone outside their order. As I studied the scroll, I noticed faint vibrations beneath my feet, similar to what I had felt in the final chamber. The air felt alive, charged with energy, as if the crypt itself were reacting to my discovery. Shadows flickered along the walls, and for a moment, I thought I saw movement, figures barely perceptible, just beyond the edge of my flashlight's beam. I reminded myself to stay calm, but the presence was undeniable. The scroll detailed practices and rituals the Templars had performed to safeguard their knowledge. Some passages spoke of ceremonies conducted in secrecy, oaths taken with solemnity, and symbolic acts meant to preserve discipline and control. Other sections hinted at protective measures, traps, sequences, and warnings designed to prevent unauthorized access. I realized that the Templars had not only preserved knowledge but had actively ensured it could not be misused. I carefully documented every symbol, sketched the carvings on the pedestal, and photographed the scroll. The chamber felt almost sacred, alive with centuries of intention and secrecy. I understood then that the crypt was more than a repository. It was a system, a deliberate construction designed to challenge those who sought forbidden knowledge and reward those who demonstrated understanding and discipline. Hours passed, and as I worked, the presence in the chamber seemed to grow more pronounced. Shadows shifted, the vibrations beneath my feet pulsed in time with my heartbeat, and I felt the weight of the Templars' vigilance pressing down on me. I realized that the crypt itself was a guardian, a living testament to the Order's rules and secrets. I had crossed into their world, and now I was part of it. When I finally decided to leave, I carefully replaced the scroll and ensured every artifact and symbol was undisturbed. Retracing my steps through the tunnels, I felt the crypt's subtle acknowledgement, almost like approval, though I couldn't be certain. The presence that had haunted me was still there, a reminder that I was now bound by the Templars' rules, a participant in their system of secrecy and vigilance. Emerging into the misty highlands, I took a deep breath, the cold air sharp and bracing. I realized that I had uncovered the first forbidden knowledge, a set of secrets deliberately hidden for centuries. The Templars' dark rules were coming to light, but the crypt still held deeper mysteries, more dangerous secrets, and layers of protection I had yet to comprehend. I knew with certainty that my journey had only just begun. I returned to the crypt at dawn, the mist lingering thick over the highlands like a shroud. Every step toward the moss-covered stone entrance felt heavier than the last, weighed down by anticipation and unease. The air was cold and damp, carrying the familiar metallic tang of the earth, as though the hill itself exhaled in warning. I knelt, cleared the moss from the crack, and crawled through, flashlight and notebook in hand. The central chamber greeted me with the familiar chill, the altar, and the carvings. The air seemed denser this morning, almost expectant. I moved quickly to the final chamber, eager to continue, yet acutely aware that I was venturing into territory far beyond what I had experienced before. The crypt had revealed part of its secrets, but I sensed now that it had been testing me, preparing me for something far more dangerous. I descended the staircase into the hidden chamber I had discovered in Part 7. The air grew colder, heavier, and the faint vibrations beneath my feet pulsed like a heartbeat, synchronized with my own. Shadows seemed to flicker at the edge of my vision, almost imperceptibly, and the faint metallic scent intensified. The crypt felt alive, watching, gauging my purpose and intent. At the heart of the chamber, the pedestal awaited, with a scroll I had previously studied. I carefully unrolled it, reviewing the symbols and inscriptions. The Templars' first forbidden knowledge had revealed instructions, oaths, and rituals, but hints at an even deeper secret had been embedded throughout the manuscript. One section, previously indecipherable, now seemed to align with other scrolls and carvings I had documented. A reference to the Chamber of Shadows, described as the ultimate repository of the Templars' most dangerous secrets. My pulse quickened. The Chamber of Shadows had not been located on any map or historical record I had ever seen. It was described as a place of preservation for knowledge so dangerous that even the Templars had enforced layers of secrecy and protection to ensure it remained undisturbed. The text emphasized that access required absolute obedience to their rules, and failure would trigger mechanisms designed to prevent intrusion, or worse. I followed the sequence described in the scroll, retracing my steps through the tunnels and passages, checking each symbol, marking each intersection. Every detail mattered. Every misstep could have consequences. I felt the crypt respond to my precision. The vibrations beneath my feet intensified, and shadows along the walls seemed to shift in recognition. I realized I was approaching the threshold of a secret that had been hidden for centuries, deliberately obscured and protected. At the far end of the hidden passage, partially concealed by rubble and darkness, a stone door stood, more imposing than any I had encountered. Its surface was carved with complex patterns, intertwining crosses, geometric shapes, and symbols I had seen throughout the crypt. The scroll emphasized that only a precise sequence of pressure points could unlock it. I traced each symbol, pressing carefully. The door shuddered, groaned, and then slowly shifted, revealing a staircase descending into complete darkness. As I descended, the air grew heavier and colder, carrying an almost tangible weight of secrecy. My flashlight flickered intermittently, and the vibrations beneath my feet pulsed more strongly, like the crypt itself was alive and reacting to my intrusion. Each step down seemed to echo centuries of history, oaths, and vigilance. I felt a growing sense of foreboding. Whatever awaited me below was not just dangerous. It was deliberate, calculated, and perhaps intended to deter anyone unworthy. At the base of the staircase, I entered a vast chamber unlike any I had seen before. The walls were lined with alcoves containing artifacts, scrolls, and objects carefully preserved over centuries. In the center stood a massive altar, carved from a single block of stone, with patterns that glowed faintly in my flashlight's beam. Symbols here were sharper, more precise, almost radiating energy. This was clearly the Chamber of Shadows, the final repository of the Templars' most dangerous knowledge. I approached the altar cautiously. Atop it rested a box larger than any I had encountered, carved from black stone and inlaid with silver symbols. Its surface seemed almost alive, shifting subtly under the beam of light. I could feel an energy, a presence, that seemed to emanate from the box itself. The crypt had prepared me, but I now realized the magnitude of the danger I faced. This was not just knowledge. It was power, preserved, and protected through centuries. I opened the box slowly. Inside were manuscripts bound in black leather, scrolls covered in symbols and ciphers more complex than any I had previously encountered, and a small vial filled with a dark liquid that shimmered with an almost unnatural quality. The manuscripts contained instructions, oaths, and rituals, but some passages hinted at practices so secretive they had been deliberately obscured. Codes of influence, manipulation, and protective measures that were, by design, dangerous to outsiders. I realized the Templars had deliberately separated knowledge into layers, each more dangerous than the last. The Chamber of Shadows represented the pinnacle of this hierarchy, the ultimate secrets, preserved through ritual, code, and physical protections. Accessing these secrets without understanding or obedience could have dire consequences. The crypt had been designed as a safeguard against misuse, and I now understood why it had been hidden so meticulously. As I examined the manuscripts, I noticed faint vibrations beneath my feet, stronger and more insistent than before. Shadows shifted along the walls, forming shapes that seemed to move with intention. A subtle pressure filled the chamber, and I felt as though the crypt itself was assessing my purpose. Every artifact, every scroll, every symbol was part of a system designed to preserve, protect, and, if necessary, punish. One manuscript contained an oath written in both Latin and code. It required the reader to acknowledge the rules of secrecy, obedience, and loyalty. Failure to adhere, it warned, could result in physical, symbolic, or metaphysical consequences. I felt a chill as I read the text. This was not merely ceremonial. It was a warning, a mechanism designed to enforce compliance and protect the most dangerous knowledge from misuse. I realized that the Chamber of Shadows was more than a repository, it was a test. Every artifact, every symbol, and every ritual had been designed to assess the worthiness of those who sought entry. The Templars had preserved knowledge not only for posterity but to ensure that only those who followed their rules could wield it safely. I felt the weight of this responsibility pressing down on me. As I carefully documented the manuscripts, photographed the artifacts, and sketched the carvings, I understood that I had crossed into a world of danger and secrecy. The Templars had deliberately preserved information that could alter history, influence events, or provide insights too powerful to be handled lightly. I was not merely an observer, I had become a participant in their system, bound by their rules and tested by their protective measures. Hours passed, and as I worked, the chamber seemed to acknowledge my diligence. The vibrations beneath my feet subsided slightly, and the shifting shadows became still. The crypt had allowed me to access its secrets, but I understood now that this privilege came with responsibility, vigilance, and respect. The Templars had designed this space to safeguard knowledge, and I was now a custodian of what I had uncovered. Finally, I replaced the manuscripts, scrolls, and artifacts carefully, ensuring every item returned to its exact position. I retraced my steps, ascending the staircase, through the hidden passage, and back into the familiar tunnels. The final chamber's presence lingered, a reminder that the Templars' dark rules were not merely historical. They were alive, enforced, and powerful. Emerging into the misty highlands, I took a deep breath, the cold air sharp against my lungs. I realized that I had uncovered the Templars' most dangerous secret, preserved for centuries, yet still protected by the crypt's mechanisms. The journey had revealed knowledge, danger, and a system of secrecy that extended beyond time. The Templars' dark rules were now fully in my awareness, and I understood that my journey had only deepened. That night, back at the cottage, I reviewed my notes and sketches. The Chamber of Shadows had revealed secrets I could barely comprehend. I understood that the Templars had hidden not just history, but power, knowledge, and danger. The crypt had tested me, and I had passed, though the consequences of failure had been all too clear. The Templars' legacy was alive, and I was now a part of it. The following day, I returned to the crypt, driven by a combination of curiosity and an uneasy sense of duty. The mist clung low over the highlands, softening the hills and trees into shadowy shapes. The stone entrance loomed ahead, almost alive, moss hanging thick as if nature itself tried to obscure it. I knelt and cleared the entrance, sliding inside the familiar narrow passage with my flashlight, notebook, and the Templars' artifacts carefully packed. The descent into the central chamber was uneventful, yet the air felt heavier than before. Every step echoed off the stone walls, a reminder of how silent and deep this place truly was. The carvings along the walls seemed sharper, more pronounced, as if responding to my presence. I moved to the hidden staircase leading to the Chamber of Shadows, my mind replaying everything I had uncovered. The crypt was more than history. It was alive, a living system designed to protect and challenge. At the base of the final staircase, the vast Chamber of Shadows awaited, its glow faintly emanating from the symbols etched into the walls and the central altar. I stepped inside, careful not to disturb a single artifact. The black stone box with silver inlays rested in its place, alongside the manuscripts, scrolls, and small vials. The air was thick, almost suffocating, charged with centuries of intention, secrecy, and power. I examined the altar closely, studying every carving and symbol for clues about how the Templars had enforced their rules and protected their secrets. It became clear that this chamber contained more than manuscripts. It was a control center, a sophisticated mechanism designed to ensure obedience and prevent unauthorized access. Some symbols were purely ceremonial, but others had practical functions. Depressions, levers, and hidden panels that could trigger consequences for missteps. As I traced the carvings with my fingers, I noticed a subtle difference in the floor near one of the corners. A series of small, shallow indentations formed a pattern that matched symbols in one of the manuscripts I had previously examined. I pressed lightly on one of the stones, and the ground shifted slightly under my touch. A low rumble echoed through the chamber, and I froze, realizing that even the floor was part of the crypt's protective system. Carefully, I followed the pattern in the manuscript, pressing each indentation in sequence. The floor vibrated, and a panel slid open along the sidewall, revealing a narrow recess. Inside was a small mechanical device, a combination of gears and levers crafted from iron and bronze, with symbols etched into every surface. It was obvious the Templars had designed it to regulate access to certain parts of the chamber and to enforce their rules. I examined the device closely. One wrong movement could easily have locked the panel permanently or triggered a mechanism I couldn't predict. The complexity of the craftsmanship was astonishing, and I realized that the Templars had anticipated every possible mistake. Their rules were enforced physically, symbolically, and psychologically. The crypt was a fortress of obedience, designed to preserve secrets through control and consequence. As I explored further, I discovered additional hidden panels and mechanisms within the alcoves. Some concealed small chests or scrolls, others appeared to be traps. One panel, when pressed incorrectly, triggered a series of levers that released a sharp, metallic sound, likely meant as a warning rather than a lethal trap. The Templars had ensured that only someone precise, careful, and observant could navigate the chamber safely. I documented each mechanism meticulously. Every lever, every symbol, every hidden panel was part of a system, a network designed to protect the crypt's secrets. The manuscripts provided clues, but only careful observation and adherence to the Templars' rules could prevent missteps. I felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on me. The crypt was alive, testing my patience, skill, and attention to detail. Hours passed as I explored and recorded the hidden mechanisms. The chamber seemed to respond to my presence. Vibrations beneath my feet pulsed more strongly when I pressed the correct sequences and faded when I hesitated. Shadows along the walls shifted, almost imperceptibly, reinforcing the sense that the crypt was watching. I realized that the Templars had designed this space to enforce consequences, not with cruelty alone, but with precision and foresight. One section of the chamber revealed the most chilling aspect of the crypt's design. A series of indentations on the floor, when pressed in the wrong sequence, triggered a hidden panel in the wall that released a small cloud of fine dust. It was harmless, but the manuscript described the symbolic meaning, a warning to those who attempted to bypass the rules. The Templars had built layers of consequences, both physical and symbolic, to preserve obedience and secrecy. I moved to another section of the chamber, where a series of levers controlled access to a smaller alcove. The scrolls had hinted at this area, describing it as the Vault of Witness. Following the coded instructions carefully, I engaged the levers in sequence. A panel slid open, revealing a collection of scrolls and small vials, preserved with extreme care. Some of the scrolls contained warnings, oaths, and records of those who had previously attempted to access forbidden knowledge. I felt a chill, This was a deliberate record of obedience and failure. The crypt had not merely hidden its secrets, it had enforced compliance, documented transgressions, and created a system that tested every visitor. I realized that the Templars' dark rules extended beyond ritual. They were a living framework, a means of preserving order and safeguarding power. The chamber was not just a repository, it was a fortress of consequence. As I explored the final alcoves, I found evidence of symbolic rituals embedded within the chamber itself. Depressions for ceremonial placement of objects, subtle carvings indicating the correct orientation, and hidden recesses for protective substances. Each element was designed to reinforce the Templars' principles: obedience, secrecy, and vigilance. The crypt had become a labyrinth of knowledge and consequence, a system of checks that only the careful and respectful could navigate successfully. By the end of the day, I had documented every mechanism, sketched the carvings, and recorded the sequences necessary to navigate the chamber safely. The crypt had revealed not only the most dangerous knowledge but the full extent of the Templars' control over it. I understood that this was not merely history. It was a living, breathing system of preservation, vigilance, and consequence, designed to outlast centuries. As I prepared to leave, I paused at the altar, feeling the weight of the crypt pressing down on me. The hidden mechanisms had made one thing clear. The Templars' dark rules were enforced not only through artifacts and manuscripts but through physical, symbolic, and psychological measures. The crypt had tested me, measured my diligence, and confirmed my respect for its rules. Emerging into the misty highlands, the air felt lighter, but the memory of the chamber's mechanisms lingered. I realized the crypt's secrets were preserved not merely through concealment, but through a living system designed to enforce obedience and ensure the safety of forbidden knowledge. The Templars had created a legacy of vigilance, and I had become part of it, bound by the rules, the knowledge, and the consequences they had carefully constructed. That night, in the cottage, I reviewed my notes and sketches. The hidden mechanisms and consequences had revealed the full complexity of the crypt. The Templars' dark rules were no longer abstract. They were tangible, precise, and formidable. I understood that my journey had entered a new phase. The crypt had revealed its systems of consequence, but there were deeper layers, rituals, and secrets I had yet to uncover. The following morning, I returned to the crypt, carrying my flashlight, notebook, and a growing sense of both excitement and apprehension. The highlands were shrouded in mist, the hills soft and grey, hiding the crypt as if it had never existed. The air was sharp and cold, biting my cheeks as I approached the moss-covered entrance. I knelt, cleared the stone, and slipped inside, feeling the familiar chill of the tunnels wrap around me. The descent into the central chamber felt different this time. Every echo of my footsteps seemed amplified, resonating through the stone walls, the air thick with expectation. The carvings on the walls seemed sharper, almost luminescent under my flashlight's beam. I moved quickly, almost reverently, toward the hidden staircase leading to the Chamber of Shadows. I knew that today I would confront not just knowledge, but the ritual and ultimate secret that had been preserved for centuries. At the base of the staircase, I entered the vast chamber, its walls lined with alcoves filled with manuscripts, scrolls, and artifacts. The black stone altar sat at the center, carved with glowing symbols and intricate patterns. I approached it cautiously, the weight of centuries pressing down on me. The crypt seemed alive, watching, responding to my presence with subtle vibrations beneath my feet and shadows that shifted along the walls. I carefully opened the large stone box in the center of the altar. Inside were the final manuscripts, bound in black leather, and the small vial of dark liquid that shimmered with an otherworldly glow. This was the culmination of all my discoveries, the last preserved secrets of the Templars, hidden in plain view but protected by centuries of mechanisms, symbols, and rituals. I understood that this moment represented a threshold, the final ritual, the ultimate test of understanding and obedience. The manuscripts described the ritual in meticulous detail. It required the precise placement of objects on the altar, the careful alignment of symbols, and the recitation of specific oaths. The text emphasized that failure could have severe consequences: physical, symbolic, or even psychological. The Templars had ensured that only those who respected their rules could access this knowledge safely. My pulse quickened as I realized the gravity of what I was about to attempt. I began arranging the objects as instructed. The ceremonial daggers were placed at precise angles, the vials set in their designated alcoves, and the scrolls positioned according to the coded instructions. Every movement had to be deliberate, every symbol had to align perfectly. The crypt seemed to respond to my actions, the faint vibrations beneath my feet growing stronger, the shadows along the walls deepening as though watching my every move. Once the objects were in place, I traced the sequences of symbols on the altar with my fingers, reciting the oaths described in the manuscripts. The language was archaic, a mixture of Latin and coded phrases, but I repeated them carefully, aware that mispronunciation or misalignment could have consequences. The air grew heavier, charged with an almost tangible energy, as though the chamber itself was alive and reacting to the ritual. As I completed the final sequence, a low hum filled the chamber, resonating through the walls and floor. The symbols on the altar glowed more brightly, casting eerie shadows that seemed to dance across the walls. The black stone box at the center shifted slightly, revealing a hidden compartment I had not noticed before. Inside lay a small object, wrapped in dark cloth, unlike anything I had encountered in the crypt. I lifted the object carefully, my hands trembling. It was a small, intricately carved talisman, black with silver inlays, pulsating faintly with energy. The manuscripts described it as the heart of obedience, a symbol of the Templars' ultimate secret, preserved for centuries. The talisman was said to embody their principles: secrecy, vigilance, and obedience. Holding it, I felt a strange energy, as if the crypt itself was imbuing me with knowledge, testing my understanding, and acknowledging my adherence to the rules. I studied the talisman, tracing the carved symbols with my fingers. The energy was subtle but undeniable, resonating with my pulse, as if it were alive. The crypt had revealed the Templars' ultimate secret, not in words, but in a symbol, a preserved object designed to convey their principles across time. I realized that this talisman was both a key and a test, representing the culmination of the rituals, mechanisms, and protections I had encountered throughout the crypt. Suddenly, I felt a shift in the air. The vibrations beneath my feet pulsed more strongly, and shadows along the walls flickered as if alive. I understood then that the crypt itself was sentient in a way, a living guardian of the Templars' most dangerous secrets. It had allowed me to reach this stage because I had followed the rules, decoded the sequences, and respected the rituals. I was being acknowledged, tested, and judged simultaneously. The manuscripts described the final step, a symbolic act of obedience. I placed the talisman on a carved depression in the center of the altar, aligning it with the glowing symbols. The chamber responded immediately. A hum resonated through the walls, and the shadows seemed to coalesce into faint, ethereal shapes, almost like the guardians of the Templars themselves observing the ritual. I realized that this act was more than ceremonial. It was a binding of knowledge, a recognition of my worthiness to witness and preserve the crypt's ultimate secret. The energy in the chamber shifted, lighter now but still charged, as if the crypt had accepted my actions. The talisman glowed faintly, radiating a subtle warmth that contrasted with the cold stone around me. I felt a profound sense of connection, not just to the Templars who had created the crypt, but to the principles they had preserved through centuries: vigilance, secrecy, and obedience. The ritual had not merely revealed knowledge, it had made me a part of their system. I carefully documented every step, every symbol, and the placement of the talisman, understanding the importance of preserving this knowledge without misusing it. The Templars had ensured that their secrets were not easily accessed, but now I was a custodian, bound by the rules, aware of the consequences of misuse, and tasked with respecting the crypt's integrity. The weight of responsibility was immense, but it was tempered by the clarity of understanding I had gained. Hours passed as I reviewed the manuscripts, sketched the altar, and photographed the talisman. The crypt remained quiet, save for the faint hum resonating from the symbols on the walls. I realized that the final ritual was not merely about uncovering knowledge, it was about comprehension, discipline, and respect. The Templars' most dangerous secret had been preserved not just physically, but through the structure, mechanisms, and challenges of the crypt itself. When I finally left the chamber, I carefully replaced the talisman and returned the manuscripts, scrolls, and artifacts to their exact positions. I retraced my steps up the staircase, through the hidden passages, and into the central chamber. The crypt seemed at peace, the shadows still, the vibrations beneath my feet fading. It had acknowledged my respect for its rules and my understanding of its secrets. I had completed the final ritual. Emerging into the misty highlands, the air felt sharp and fresh, carrying the scent of earth and moss. I took a deep breath, the weight of what I had experienced pressing on me. I had witnessed the Templars' ultimate secret, understood the purpose of the crypt, and participated in the ritual that had preserved their most dangerous knowledge for centuries. The Templars' dark rules were now fully revealed, but with that revelation came responsibility, vigilance, and respect. That night, back at the cottage, I reviewed my notes and sketches. The final ritual had revealed the heart of the Templars' legacy, a living system of knowledge, obedience, and secrecy. I understood that the crypt had tested me, measured me, and ultimately allowed me access because I had followed the rules. The Templars' secrets were no longer abstract. They were tangible, precise, and powerful, preserved through ritual, mechanism, and careful design. I realized that the journey through the crypt had changed me. I was now a participant in the Templars' legacy, bound by their rules, entrusted with their knowledge, and forever connected to the Chamber of Shadows. The final ritual had not merely revealed their secret, it had made me a custodian of it, responsible for preserving the balance between knowledge, power, and consequence. The morning after performing the final ritual, I returned to the highlands with a mixture of anticipation and unease. The mist lay thick over the hills, the air crisp and biting, as though the land itself were aware of the weight I carried. I approached the moss-covered entrance of the crypt, hesitant yet compelled. The knowledge I had gained was immense, but I couldn't ignore the feeling that the crypt's tests were not yet complete. Inside, the tunnels were silent but charged with a palpable tension. Every echo of my footsteps resonated through the stone, each drip of water magnified, each shadow dancing slightly at the edge of my vision. The crypt seemed aware of my presence, alive in a way I could no longer dismiss. It was not merely a repository of history, it was a sentient guardian of the Templars' secrets, monitoring, testing, and preserving its legacy. I descended the staircase to the Chamber of Shadows, the final ritual still fresh in my mind. The talisman, the heart of obedience, rested where I had left it, faintly glowing, as if alive. The manuscripts and scrolls lay in perfect order, untouched. The crypt had accepted my adherence to the rules, but I now sensed there were consequences I had yet to encounter, subtler and more profound than physical traps or mechanical systems. As I studied the manuscripts again, I noticed details I had missed before. Certain symbols now appeared in new contexts, suggesting that the crypt's design extended beyond what I had understood. The Templars had not only preserved knowledge, they had created a living system that could communicate with those who entered, testing their comprehension, discipline, and even morality. The crypt seemed to demand not just obedience, but awareness, reflection, and respect. I examined one scroll that had previously seemed ordinary. Its text now revealed a layer of meaning I hadn't noticed. Warnings about consequences not just for missteps in the crypt, but for misinterpretation or misuse of the knowledge. The Templars had designed the crypt to protect not only their secrets but the balance of understanding. Knowledge wielded incorrectly could cause harm, and the crypt was built to enforce this principle. Suddenly, I felt a shift in the chamber. The faint vibrations beneath my feet intensified, rhythmic and deliberate. Shadows along the walls seemed to move with intent, coalescing into shapes that suggested the presence of observers, spectral remnants of those who had safeguarded the crypt for centuries. The air was heavier, charged with energy, as though the crypt were reminding me that knowledge carried responsibility. I was aware, more acutely than ever, that I had stepped into a system that extended far beyond physical preservation. I walked slowly around the altar, the talisman in place, considering the consequences of my actions. The Templars had designed this chamber not to punish recklessness alone, but to educate, guide, and enforce a code of conduct. Their warnings about obedience were not threats. They were mechanisms to ensure that their secrets remained safe and used only by those who understood the weight of responsibility. The crypt itself was a teacher, using presence, symbols, and mechanisms to instruct and test. One of the alcoves drew my attention. A small hidden compartment had shifted slightly, revealing a stack of scrolls I had not seen before. They were older, more fragile, and the symbols more intricate. I carefully unrolled the top one and gasped. It detailed knowledge considered too dangerous for ordinary use. Codes of influence, manipulation of events, and strategic decisions meant to shape history itself. The Templars had recorded not only their actions but the rules governing the application of this knowledge, ensuring that only those who respected the system could wield it safely. I realized that the consequences of the ritual extended beyond the chamber. By performing the final ritual correctly, I had demonstrated my adherence to the rules, and the crypt had allowed me access to this knowledge. But misuse or disregard of these principles could activate protective measures, mechanical, symbolic, or even metaphysical. The Templars had anticipated human curiosity, hubris, and error, embedding safeguards that extended through time and space. The deeper I delved into the scrolls, the more I understood the crypt's intelligence. The symbols, sequences, and rituals were designed not merely for preservation but for evaluation. The crypt responded to intention, precision, and understanding. It communicated through vibrations, shadow, and the shifting of panels, guiding those who followed the rules and warning those who faltered. I was not merely exploring history, I was engaging with a system that had outlasted centuries, alive and aware. I spent hours cross-referencing manuscripts, deciphering hidden codes, and noting the consequences described for specific actions. Some were practical. Triggering levers incorrectly could lock compartments or release warning mechanisms. Others were symbolic. Misplacing scrolls or artifacts could result in the loss of favor, a concept tied to obedience and respect for the Templars' rules. I realized that every detail mattered, every observation was part of a larger design. As night fell, the chamber seemed to shift subtly. Shadows deepened, and the faint glow from the altar's symbols brightened. I sensed the crypt acknowledging my understanding, the energy calming slightly. The consequences of the ritual were not punitive, they were instructional, enforcing a principle that the Templars had valued above all: the careful stewardship of knowledge. I felt both awe and humility, aware of the immense responsibility I now carried. I carefully documented my findings, sketching the hidden mechanisms, photographing symbols, and writing detailed notes on the consequences outlined in the manuscripts. The crypt's design was elegant, deliberate, and precise. It had tested me through sequences, rituals, and observation, ensuring that only those who respected its rules could access the deepest knowledge safely. I understood that the Templars had engineered a system that transcended time, a living guardian of secrets that demanded vigilance, discipline, and reflection. Before leaving, I performed one final action. I recited the oaths described in the manuscripts, reaffirming my adherence to the Templars' rules. The crypt responded subtly, vibrations fading and shadows becoming still. I realized that the consequences of the ritual extended beyond the immediate experience. They were a continuous test of respect, awareness, and integrity. By acknowledging the rules, I had aligned myself with the principles the Templars had preserved for centuries. Emerging into the misty highlands, the air felt crisp and electric. The weight of what I had learned pressed on me, but with it came a profound understanding of responsibility. The crypt had revealed its deepest secrets, shown me the mechanisms of obedience, and demonstrated the consequences of disobedience. I was now a custodian of knowledge, bound by rules, aware of consequences, and forever connected to the Templars' legacy. That night, back at the cottage, I reviewed my notes and sketches once more. The crypt had not only preserved knowledge, it had created a system of living protection, one that enforced principles, tested understanding, and safeguarded the most dangerous secrets. I realized that my journey had entered a new dimension. The consequences of the ritual and the crypt's deeper mysteries were now part of my reality. I understood that the Templars' dark rules were not simply historical curiosities. They were active, functional, and precise. By following them, I had gained access to knowledge, but I had also accepted the responsibility and potential consequences inherent in that knowledge. The crypt systems ensured that only those who respected its design could engage with its secrets safely. The next steps of my exploration would be guided by this understanding. The crypt had revealed its consequences, its mechanisms, and its deeper mysteries. But I knew there were still layers to uncover, sequences to decode, and truths to interpret. The Templars' legacy was alive, and I had become a participant, bound by their rules, responsible for their knowledge, and aware of the consequences that awaited any misstep. The next morning, I returned to the crypt with a mixture of determination and unease. The mist hung low over the highlands, curling around the hills in soft grey waves. The entrance loomed ahead, moss thick and green, hiding the stone like a natural shroud. I knelt and cleared the moss, sliding inside the narrow passage, flashlight in hand, aware that today I was venturing deeper than ever before. The tunnels seemed quieter than usual, almost expectant. Every echo of my footsteps carried weight, resonating off the stone in a rhythm that felt deliberate. I passed the familiar central chamber and descended the hidden staircase leading to the Chamber of Shadows. The air was colder here, the faint metallic scent more pronounced, carrying a subtle weight that pressed against my chest. The crypt seemed alive, aware that I was returning, ready to measure my purpose and intent. At the base of the staircase, the vast chamber greeted me with its familiar chill and dim glow from the symbols etched into the walls. The black stone altar stood at the center, surrounded by manuscripts, scrolls, and artifacts carefully preserved. The talisman, the heart of obedience, rested in its place, pulsating faintly with energy. I approached it with reverence, aware that this would be the deepest layer I had yet to explore. I examined the manuscripts once more. One in particular, previously overlooked, contained sequences that hinted at another hidden chamber, referred to cryptically as the Core of Shadows. The text emphasized that this layer was the ultimate test, designed to challenge understanding, obedience, and courage simultaneously. It warned that only those who had fully respected the Templars' rules could access this deepest secret safely. Following the sequences, I traced the symbols along the walls, pressing depressions and activating mechanisms I had documented in previous visits. The vibrations beneath my feet pulsed in rhythm with my heartbeat, growing stronger as I approached the hidden passage. Shadows shifted at the edges of my flashlight's beam, almost imperceptibly, but enough to make me feel that the crypt was observing, evaluating, and responding. Finally, I reached a partially concealed stone door, unlike any I had encountered before. Its carvings were denser, more intricate, and the symbols seemed almost alive, shifting slightly in the flickering light. The manuscript described the correct sequence for opening it, a precise alignment of pressure points combined with a verbal acknowledgement of the Templars' rules. I followed the instructions carefully, every motion deliberate, aware that any error could trigger consequences. The door groaned and shifted, revealing a narrow staircase descending into complete darkness. I descended cautiously, the air growing heavier and colder with each step. The vibrations beneath my feet pulsed more strongly, almost as if the crypt itself were alive and guiding me. I realized that this was no ordinary chamber. It was a final test, designed to evaluate understanding, discipline, and respect for the Templars' legacy. At the bottom, I entered the Core of Shadows. The chamber was vast, larger than any other section of the crypt, with walls lined with alcoves containing artifacts, scrolls, and objects more elaborate than anything I had previously seen. In the center stood a massive circular stone platform, carved with concentric symbols and geometric patterns that glowed faintly. The entire space radiated energy, a presence both tangible and intangible, as though the crypt itself were concentrated in this final layer. I approached the platform cautiously. The manuscripts described a ritual that required the placement of the talisman, specific artifacts, and the recitation of oaths. Each step had to be precise. The Templars had designed this layer to be both instructional and evaluative. The energy in the chamber pulsed subtly, almost in response to my movements, emphasizing that the crypt was alive, aware, and responsive. I arranged the objects according to the instructions, aligning the talisman at the center of the platform. The symbols around it seemed to pulse in response, casting flickering shadows across the walls. I recited the oaths carefully, aware that each word, gesture, and placement carried significance. The air thickened, charged with energy that pressed against my chest and made my pulse quicken. I realized that the Templars had embedded not only knowledge but a mechanism for judgment, ensuring that only those worthy could complete the test. As I completed the sequence, the platform beneath my hands vibrated, and a faint light emerged from cracks in the stone, illuminating the alcoves and symbols. Shadows along the walls seemed to coalesce into shapes that resembled observers, ethereal remnants of the Templars themselves, guardians of the crypt. I felt their presence as if they were assessing my comprehension, my obedience, and my respect for the rules. The final manuscript described the ultimate test, a decision. It required me to choose whether to remove the talisman from the platform or leave it in place. Removing it symbolized the acquisition of knowledge for personal use, while leaving it represented adherence to the Templars' rules and recognition of the crypt's authority. My pulse raced. I understood the stakes. The crypt's design ensured that intent, humility, and respect mattered more than curiosity or ambition. I paused, considering the consequences. The crypt had revealed its deepest layer, tested my precision, and now challenged my judgment. I realized that the Templars had designed this ultimate test not merely to preserve knowledge, but to evaluate character, integrity, and the capacity to respect secrets that carried immense power. The decision was not abstract. It was binding, symbolic, and instructive. I left the talisman in place. The chamber responded immediately. The vibrations beneath my feet calmed, the pulsing symbols stabilized, and the shadows along the walls softened. The crypt had acknowledged my choice. I understood then that the Templars' ultimate secret was not just the knowledge itself. It was the wisdom to respect, preserve, and follow the rules that protected it. The core of shadows had completed its test, and I had passed. I spent hours documenting the chamber, sketching symbols, photographing artifacts, and transcribing the final manuscripts. Every detail mattered, every sequence was precise, and the energy in the room seemed to approve of my diligence. The Templars had created a living system of preservation, judgment, and instruction, and I now fully understood the depth of their design. Before leaving, I performed one final gesture, a silent acknowledgement of the crypt's rules, principles, and guardians. The energy in the chamber shifted subtly, almost as if offering approval. I understood that this layer had not merely tested my actions, it had evaluated my intent, comprehension, and respect. The crypt was alive, and I had become a participant in its system, a custodian of the Templars' legacy. Ascending the staircase, I felt the weight of centuries lifting slightly, replaced by clarity and responsibility. I moved through the hidden passage and back into the central chamber, where the talisman, manuscripts, and artifacts remained undisturbed. The crypt had accepted my adherence to the rules, acknowledged my understanding, and revealed its deepest layer. I had experienced the ultimate Templar test. Emerging into the misty highlands, the air felt crisp and alive. The crypt had revealed its most profound secrets, taught the consequences of disobedience, and tested my capacity for respect, humility, and comprehension. I understood that the Templars' dark rules were not merely historical, they were living principles, preserved through mechanism, ritual, and deliberate design. I had passed the ultimate test, but with that came responsibility. That night, in the cottage, I reviewed my notes, sketches, and photographs. The core of shadows had revealed the crypt's deepest layer and the ultimate Templar secret. Knowledge preserved not only through concealment, but through living mechanisms that tested, judged, and instructed. I realized that the crypt was more than a repository. It was a system, alive and aware, demanding obedience, integrity, and vigilance from those who dared to enter. I knew that my journey had reached a critical point. The deepest layer had revealed both knowledge and principle. The Templars' legacy was now part of me, and I was bound by their rules, responsible for the secrets I had witnessed, and aware of the consequences of misuse. The crypt's ultimate test had been completed, and I had emerged not only with knowledge but with understanding, a comprehension of the Templars' system, their rules, and their enduring wisdom. The next morning, I returned to the crypt with a sense of solemn purpose. The highlands were shrouded in mist, the hills fading into grey silhouettes. The entrance loomed ahead, moss-thick, concealing the stone as if nature itself were guarding it. I cleared the entrance, slipping inside with my flashlight, notebook, and the accumulated knowledge of everything I had discovered so far. Today, I knew, I would uncover the final warning the Templars had left for anyone daring enough to reach this far. The tunnels felt quieter than ever, the echoes of my footsteps stretched and deepened, almost as if the crypt were listening. I moved through the central chamber with measured steps, avoiding even the smallest disturbance. The carvings on the walls seemed to shift slightly, responding to my presence. I descended the staircase into the Chamber of Shadows, the weight of all I had experienced pressing on me. The talisman, the heart of obedience, rested on the altar, glowing faintly, its energy both reassuring and daunting. I approached the altar and began reviewing the manuscripts once more. Among them, I found a set I had not examined closely, the Codex of Warnings. Its pages were fragile, darker than the others, and the symbols seemed etched with precision intended to endure centuries. As I read, I realized this was the Templars' final communication, a layered warning meant for anyone who reached this stage of the crypt. It was more than a caution. It was an instruction manual for surviving and preserving the knowledge safely. The Codex emphasized one point repeatedly: the danger of exposure. The Templars had hidden knowledge so potent that even understanding it improperly could lead to catastrophic consequences. Some passages described physical, psychological, and symbolic repercussions for those who misused or neglected the principles of obedience and secrecy. The crypt had been constructed not merely as a repository, but as a guardian, a living system that enforced vigilance across time. I traced the intricate symbols on the pages, noting their repetition across the codex and in the carvings around the chamber. Each symbol seemed to resonate, almost as if transmitting the weight of the warning. The Templars had designed this communication to be experienced, not merely read. Their instructions demanded comprehension, reflection, and adherence. Knowledge was power, but power misapplied could invoke consequences that extended beyond the crypt itself. One passage described the importance of restraint. The custodian must preserve the balance. Share not for ambition. Reveal not for vanity. The shadows remember those who falter. The wording was deliberate, emphasizing responsibility. The Templars had not intended for this knowledge to be exploited. They had engineered a system that ensured only those who truly understood and respected their rules could benefit. I felt the gravity of their wisdom pressing on me. The Codex also contained practical instructions. It detailed how to restore the talisman, realign the altar symbols, and reset the mechanisms in the Chamber of Shadows. Each step was precise, intended to preserve the crypt's integrity and prevent unintended consequences. The Templars had anticipated centuries of human curiosity and error, embedding safeguards in both physical and symbolic forms. Following these steps was not optional. It was part of the final warning. As I worked to document every detail, the crypt seemed alive around me. Vibrations beneath my feet pulsed subtly, shadows shifted in response to my movements, and the faint metallic scent of the tunnels intensified. I realized the crypt was testing me even now, gauging my diligence, attention to detail, and respect for the principles the Templars had preserved. Their warning was not abstract. It was living, a system enforcing awareness and responsibility. One section of the Codex described potential dangers for those who revealed the knowledge improperly. The consequences ranged from social and political repercussions to psychological disturbance, and in rare instances, physical danger within the crypt itself. The Templars had built this layer of protection not as a threat, but as a safeguard against the misuse of wisdom that had been preserved for centuries. I understood then that the crypt was not merely a historical site, it was a living guardian, transmitting caution through both design and experience. The final warning was perhaps the most sobering. The Codex emphasized that custodians of this knowledge must continually honor the Templars' rules. Missteps could trigger mechanisms I had already experienced, and repeated misuse could even distort the crypt's protective energy. The text made clear that the crypt itself could remember actions over time, subtly influencing those who entered repeatedly or ignored its principles. Knowledge was alive here, and respect was mandatory. I carefully documented every step, sketching symbols, photographing manuscripts, and writing detailed notes. Each instruction, warning, and sequence was crucial to understanding the full scope of the Templars system. The crypt had revealed its deepest secrets, tested my understanding and obedience, and now imparted its final warning. That knowledge, when handled improperly, could be more dangerous than ignorance. Before leaving, I performed the final ritual outlined in the Codex, realigning the talisman, resetting the altar symbols, and ensuring all artifacts and manuscripts were restored to their precise positions. The crypt responded with subtle vibrations and a faint glow from the symbols, almost as if acknowledging that the warning had been understood and respected. I realized that the Templars' guidance was not a relic of the past. It was an active principle, a living framework ensuring the safety of their legacy. Emerging into the misty highlands, the air felt sharp and alive. I took a deep breath, the weight of what I had learned pressing on me. The crypt had revealed its final warning. Knowledge carries responsibility, obedience preserves integrity, and respect ensures safety. The Templars' dark rules were more than instructions. They were living principles, tested across centuries, and now entrusted to me as a custodian. That night, back at the cottage, I reviewed my notes, sketches, and photographs. The final warning had revealed the stakes. Knowledge preserved through the crypt was powerful, dangerous, and bound to consequences. The Templars had designed a system that combined ritual, mechanism, and instruction to safeguard their secrets. I understood that my journey was not complete simply by uncovering these layers. It required continuous vigilance, careful preservation, and unwavering respect for the principles I had learned. The Codex concluded with a final admonition. The custodian walks a path of shadows and light. Knowledge is power, but restraint is wisdom. Preserve the balance, and the crypt will endure. Fail, and the shadows remember. I read the words repeatedly, understanding the depth of their meaning. The Templars had entrusted their legacy to those who could comprehend both the knowledge and the responsibility that came with it. I realized that the final warning was not merely about the crypt, it was about me. The journey through the tunnels, chambers, and rituals had been a test, and the Codex ensured that this test extended beyond the crypt itself. Knowledge, once uncovered, demanded continuous reflection, adherence to principles, and respect for the systems that preserved it. The Templars' dark rules were alive, and I was now bound to them. As I prepared to leave the Highlands, I felt a profound mix of awe and humility. The crypt had revealed secrets, tested my discipline, and imparted its final warning. I was a custodian of knowledge, bound by rules, aware of consequences, and entrusted with the preservation of the Templars' legacy. The shadows of the crypt would remain with me, a constant reminder that obedience, vigilance, and respect were the keys to safeguarding powerful knowledge. The morning air in the Highlands was crisp and clear, carrying the scent of moss and stone as I made my final approach to the crypt. The mist clung low to the hills, curling around rocks and trees like an ancient veil. I paused at the entrance, kneeling to clear the moss one last time, and felt a mixture of reverence and trepidation. Today, I was not seeking discovery, but reflection, an opportunity to fully understand the journey I had undertaken and the weight of the Templars' legacy. Stepping into the tunnels, I moved slowly, allowing the familiar echoes of my footsteps to settle in my mind. The central chamber welcomed me with a chill I had grown accustomed to, yet it felt different, quieter, almost serene, as if acknowledging that the final stages of my journey were unfolding. The carvings on the walls seemed more pronounced, their symbolism resonating now with clarity I hadn't experienced on my first visits. Descending the hidden staircase to the Chamber of Shadows, I felt the energy of the crypt in its fullest expression. The talisman, manuscripts, and artifacts were all in place, untouched since my last visit. The glow from the altar's symbols bathed the chamber in a subtle light, highlighting the intricate carvings and the complex network of mechanisms embedded throughout the walls and floor. This space was alive, a guardian of centuries of knowledge, and I understood now that I had become part of its system. I approached the talisman carefully. Holding it again, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. From the first discoveries of hidden passages to the complex rituals and the ultimate test in the core of shadows, each step had been deliberate, dangerous, and instructive. The crypt had been a teacher, challenging my understanding, judgment, and respect for rules I had initially barely comprehended. Each mechanism, each symbol, each ritual had been a test of character, not just intellect. As I reviewed the manuscripts, I considered the Templars' intentions. Their dark rules were not mere instructions. They were a living framework, designed to preserve knowledge while ensuring it was handled responsibly. The Crypt had demonstrated that power and understanding were inseparable from discipline, respect, and vigilance. I realized that the Templars' wisdom extended far beyond the artifacts and manuscripts. It was embedded in the design, in the challenges, and in the living system that had endured for centuries. The Codex of Warnings, with its precise instructions and layered admonitions, had been the final piece of guidance. I understood that knowledge itself was not dangerous. The misuse of it was. The Templars had crafted a system that enforced this principle through both tangible mechanisms and intangible judgments. By following the rules, observing the symbols, and adhering to the rituals, I had become a custodian. My actions were now bound by their legacy, and every future decision carried responsibility. I walked the chamber slowly, observing every alcove, every carved symbol, and every mechanism I had documented. Each element told a story of foresight, precision, and vigilance. The Templars had anticipated curiosity, ambition, and error, designing the crypt to preserve its secrets while ensuring that only those worthy could access the deepest knowledge safely. I understood now that the crypt's living system was not a threat, but a protector, a guardian that demanded obedience, comprehension, and humility. Pausing at the altar, I reflected on the ultimate test in the core of shadows. The decision to leave the talisman in place had been more than a symbolic gesture. It had been an affirmation of respect for the crypt, the rules, and the Templars' legacy. The crypt had responded, confirming my understanding and reinforcing the principle that knowledge must be preserved and handled responsibly. That moment had transformed my perception. The journey was never about discovery alone, but about becoming a participant in a centuries-old system of guardianship. The consequences I had observed, the subtle vibrations, the shifting shadows, the mechanisms that required precision, were all part of the crypt's method for reinforcing understanding. The Templars had designed a world in miniature, where every action mattered, every intention was tested, and every observer, whether physical or ethereal, was aware of missteps. I realized that their design was not about punishment, but about instruction, a framework that ensured knowledge was safe, respected, and used wisely. I thought about the Codex's repeated warnings: restraint, vigilance, and respect. They had preserved knowledge too potent to be wielded recklessly. The crypt had demonstrated through its living system that secrets were not merely to be uncovered, they were to be understood, honored, and protected. As I reflected, I felt a profound sense of responsibility. I was no longer merely an observer. I was now a custodian, entrusted with the principles, rituals, and knowledge that had been carefully safeguarded for centuries. Emerging from the Chamber of Shadows for the last time, I retraced my steps through the hidden passages and central chamber. The crypt seemed to acknowledge my departure, the subtle vibrations fading, the shadows settling into stillness. I realized that the journey had been as much about internal transformation as about external discovery. I had learned patience, diligence, humility, and the weight of responsibility, the qualities that had defined the Templar system and ensured the preservation of their secrets. Outside, the highlands were bathed in soft morning light. The mist was lifting, revealing rolling hills and distant valleys. The crypt's entrance, moss-covered and ancient, seemed almost as if it had never been disturbed. I paused, reflecting on the enormity of what I had experienced. The Templars had created more than a crypt. They had created a living legacy, a system that transcended time, and a test that revealed the character of those who dared to enter. That evening, back at the cottage, I reviewed my notes and sketches one final time. Every detail mattered: the mechanisms, symbols, rituals, warnings, and consequences. The crypt had imparted knowledge, yes, but more importantly, it had imparted understanding. The importance of obedience, vigilance, and respect for powerful knowledge. I realized that the Templars' dark rules were not a relic of the past. They were enduring principles, alive and relevant, guiding those who had earned access. I reflected on the journey as a whole. From the first mysterious passage to the core of shadows and the final Codex of Warnings, each step had been designed to challenge, instruct, and transform. The Templars had ensured that only those who approached their knowledge with respect, precision, and humility could benefit. The Crypt had been alive all along, testing my comprehension, my intent, and my ability to act responsibly. In the quiet of the Highlands that night, I understood that the journey was never truly over. Knowledge was living, and the Crypt system demanded vigilance, awareness, and respect. I had become part of the Templars' legacy, bound to the principles they had preserved for centuries. The shadows of the Crypt, the mechanisms, the rituals, and the warnings would remain with me forever. A reminder that obedience, comprehension, and restraint were the keys to preserving powerful secrets. Finally, I placed my notes and sketches in secure storage, ensuring that the Crypt's secrets remained protected. I had learned that revelation alone was not the goal. Preservation, respect, and adherence to the rules were paramount. The Templars' dark rules had guided me, tested me, and ultimately shaped me into a custodian. I left the Highlands with a profound sense of awe, responsibility, and humility, knowing that the Crypt's legacy would continue, alive and vigilant, through my stewardship. As I walked away from the moss-covered entrance for the last time, I looked back once. The Crypt stood silent, ancient, and eternal, a guardian of knowledge, a teacher, and a test of character. I understood then that the Templars' most enduring secret was not hidden in manuscripts or artifacts alone. It was in the principles they had preserved, the rules they had enforced, and the living system they had created to ensure that knowledge remained safe across centuries. And with that understanding, I carried the Templars' legacy forward, not as a conqueror of secrets, but as a custodian, bound by obedience, vigilance, and respect, forever mindful that knowledge is power only when wielded wisely.